This week, Matt Bishop from Bitwarden will discuss password vaults, storing more than just passwords, free software to manage SSH keys, and vaults for developers. In the security news, new old Palo Alto vulnerabilities explained, taking down the power grid with a FlipperZero, more vulnerable bootloaders, putting garbage in your .ass file. The US government wants to look at routers, magic backdoors, weak password hashing. Everyone's talking about Deepseek, hardware level antivirus, VMware ESXi and SSH. And if you pay a ransom, you're likely not to get your data back. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Paul's Security Weekly is supported by Bitwarden, the trusted solution for password, passkey, and secrets management. Bitwarden empowers everyone to create and manage strong and unique credentials across all accounts and devices. With enterprise SSO integration, end-to-end encryption, and secure autofill capabilities, Bitwarden defends against phishing attacks and data breaches. Strengthen your security posture with tools built to protect what matters most. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Bitwarden. Coming to you from Purgatory Studios in semi-high definition, compliments of Darth Vader himself, this is Paul's Security Weekly, episode number 859, being recorded on Wednesday, January 29th, but airing on Thursday, January 30th. So there's a little gap there. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Josh Marpet. Josh, welcome.
Hey, Paul, it's good to be here and not sound as horrible as I have been the past few weeks.
You still sound bad.
I know.
Well, content leaves much to be desired. But,
I'm gargling.
Exactly. Ear canal's bleeding, but it's fine.
Bill Swearingen is here with us. Bill, welcome.
Matey, I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, so you were dressed up like a pirate.
Yep, I sure was.
I don't know why, but
I was in Tampa for Gasparilla. If you've never heard of it, Google it. It's a great time.
The pictures were awesome, dude.
Yes. Sam Bound is here with us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. Glad to be here.
And, of course, Miss Mandy Logan.
Good evening. Very glad to be here.
Welcome. Yes.
Thank you.
Let's see. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2025 full conference pass. The RSA Conference will take place April 28th to May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. To register using the discount code, visit securityweekly.com/RSAC25 and use the code 5U5SECWeekly. We hope to see you there. This segment is sponsored by Bitwarden. You can go to securityweekly.com/Bitwarden to learn more. We're excited to have Matt Bishop, principal architect from Bitwarden, with us today. Let's see. Matt has experience investing in technology initiatives for core company operations, security, deployment, and infrastructure. He was a senior engineering leader at Olo, where he managed online and mobile ordering delivery software. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yes. Nice to have you, Matt. How'd you get your start in information security or in technology, right? I'm not sure where, what your intersection was that brought you here to Bitwarden and on our show.
Yeah. I guess my story starts with security. Maybe I was kind of a young hacker kid when computers were first coming out, and maybe not admitting to playing around with phone lines or whatever else may have been around me when I was, a middle schooler or a high schooler, and learning how all that works, making quarter tones and stuff like that. So that was always fun to just explore burgeoning technology when I was a kid. And then the internet really popularized, and I started getting more and more into really, I guess, the software development side. Not that I called it that. I bought a big book about HTML. So I kind of really shifted over to being more of a programmer and got more and more into different things. .NET and C# has been my big programming thing for a really long time, which is what Bitwarden's core is kind of built on. But the back to security thing was just added necessity. I had a startup in Florida where I'm at for about a decade, and there were 3 of us to found it. And so everybody needed to do a lot of things. So I was the tech guy and also then like the IT department and then I needed to build security into our software and so on and so forth. So then I started picking things up as I went along, and I'd say I'm much more of an experience-based learner, and then I tried to professionalize it over time. So, here I am at Bitwarden today, where security is a core practice, but the two are hand in hand. You're building software, you're securing software, and vice versa.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jeff's not here. Jeff is, I think, one of the big poo-poo poo-ponents poo-ponents of
Potpourri.
of password managers. I was explaining to Matt the other day. I'm like, Jeff, I think given his background, right, former NSA, he's just got this knack. He's like, I can just remember all my passwords. I'm like, Jeff, I don't know how you do that. I can't remember all my passwords for everything, right? Maybe a core set of things, but then you get all the other passwords for all the other things. It's not just websites, not just SaaS products, but it's other systems. And I'm like, I can't keep it all straight. And so, as soon as some of that technology became available, I'm like, yeah, we need a password vault.
That just means that Jeff's passwords are bad, right? Like we should start attacking him,
Could be.
Yeah.
He welcomes that. He welcomes that, actually.
If he's got a great mind for it, that's impressive. But yeah, we have a generator in our product, and if you're going to do it right, it's got to be pretty complicated. Otherwise, the machine's going to probably break it instantly.
Yeah, and that's one feature I like. I know that I've been a Unix, Linux sysadmin for a really long time in various capacities, and I've written my fair share of password generators using bash scripts, right? Like ridiculous random number hacks, right? And I was like, oh, I like the one in the password manager way better. It's it's just easier, especially when you're in the browser, right? And so other than like the less than 1%, I think there's like, oh, I can get by without a password manager. For the rest of us, I feel like it's a required piece of software that we need. I'm sure you'd agree from your viewpoint, Matt, right? But like all the other hosts too, right? We're all not like, this is something that we all need for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly an every person kind of thing. That there's nobody that moves through life essentially that doesn't need to write down some secure piece of information. And password is almost a constraining thing. It could be some kind of personal information. Maybe you have nothing to do with computers otherwise, but you just want to remember something important to you. The vault, as we call it, holds true there. You just need a secure place to get to your stuff. And for a long time, and it's still true, we even kind of recommend this, is if you want to be super secure, you go open a safe and write your master password, we call it, down and put it in that safe. Like some people operate that way, but unless you're living in the life of a physical secure safe, which a lot of people don't have, you're going to need something with some software that's on your everyday devices.
Right.
So I think, so one of the things that I've been doing, probably it's probably been maybe in the last 2 years, but really pushing password managers down into my family, and it kind of pulls exactly to what you just said with Jeff and Jeff, I'm just kidding. I know that you're brilliant, but what I want is I want my friends and family to not know their passwords. I don't want you to even know it, right? Like I want it to be so complex and that you don't even know it, right? And what you find is, even with people that are non-technical, after about a month, right? Like the using the password manager, it's become so user friendly recently that it becomes very, very easy to go to. Doesn't interrupt your workflow at all, right? And just the level of security is much better, I would say.
Yeah, because I've in the past tried to roll my own vaults using like GPG, and so like before password managers were super common. I'm like, all right, wait, how do I create an encrypted volume? And I'll store my passwords there, and all that it's just overhead that you have to maintain, and recovery of that. When you're doing it on your own using command line open source tools, you're on your own.
Which thumb drive is it on?
Yeah, exactly, dude. So. I love this technology for that, for that reason. But Bitwarden's a slightly different play in the market, Matt. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of open source and Linux podcasts, and we're all seem to be about Bitwarden. And so, could you describe, Matt, like the open source component, the open source history behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been since the beginning. So the founder, his name's Kyle. and I have known each other for a while, and that's just always how he started, was right out of the gate was, let me just go try and really as a side project, build something cool that fits this space that works. And this was back, I'll just say 10 or so years ago, where there maybe wasn't as much in password management. And so something was needed for that kind of thing. So being different, showing transparency when you're storing your most secure things, you want to have people trust that you're going to do it in a way that can be audited, vetted, you see changes occur, all that kind of good stuff. And that's how it began. Just building everything totally available so that everybody can see it. And even the things that we build today for more of a business or enterprise community are still source available so that you can look at how everything works, build it out, and just all the tools, all the features are right there. And we've created, I think, a great community from that across multiple platforms beyond GitHub, where our source is available today, to allow for feedback, product feedback, technical feedback, community contributions. We every single day are looking at some idea that someone has that they've added to the product as a result. And it's not just about features, it's just about making little things better. One of the best things I think we've done with this open source angle is allowed for translations to occur. So I don't remember the number, but dozens of languages are available for the platform, where you can use what you need to in the most obscure language in the world, and it's available because of our great community that have embraced that.
That's awesome. Yeah. I gotta say, congrats.
And also, we're not just storing passwords in our vaults any longer, right? We're storing all kinds of things. And I think, for me, I think it's probably in most cases better and more secure for you to store your sensitive information in the vault than not, right? Maybe you have multiple. I'm sure you guys have that feature too, right? Multiple vaults, and the vaults can be shared. I think that's standard feature today in this technology. But you're storing credit cards. Does not everyone store their credit cards in the vault?
We don't have numbers about who does what, because we're this end-to-end encrypted platform, so we can't really see necessarily what you're putting in there. Of course, we literally cannot.
We want to,
and so the use is up to the user, but it's a little bit more abstract. So you want to make it grounded for the everyday user, but we are truly a open-ended encrypted vault that you could put really whatever you wanted into. The easiest way is, think of it like an attachment. That could be a document, that could be an image, that could be whatever you want it to be. And you can put it inside something, and we make it user friendly for where it makes sense. So great examples, like in my personal life, I have my some of my derived GPG key information in there, like super nerdy technical thing. But I've also got my photo of my driver's license in there so that I can pull it from wherever I'm at, because some website's going to need that, or a passport photo, or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of cool stuff.
What websites are you visiting? I know what that means.
So, it's like whatever needs my identity. But now they're smart. You got to get on a camera and turn your face side to side or whatever. Technology has evolved, but we try to plug into that vault wherever possible so the user has whatever they need right at their fingertips. So it's really this open-ended vault that you can just put whatever you need into, and it's really yours. We can't decrypt it if we wanted to.
I have a question.
Go ahead,
and again, since 2018, every single conversation I bring up password managers, and every talk I've given, I think it is primary and was most useful, especially for the layperson. But I also have found there is a lot of pushback from security practitioners, not as much from the public, but from security practitioners. And I'm curious how you have bridged that, or if you feel like that has really started modifying in your discussion with security teams.
So when you say pushback, Mandy, like what is that pushback? Like all your eggs in one basket? Is that what you're hearing? Or
or just that, oh, well, that's not good enough, or this needs to be done, or, oh, well, let's do blah, 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 or, bringing up other things. And I'm like, but for the end user, for the people in the field, for the people, like for security teams that are managing a lot of endpoints, I cannot wrap my head around why a security practitioner would push back or say that password managers were not useful. And yet I feel like that's happened in probably to some degree in 70% of the conversations I've had with security practitioners, not with the general public and not when doing like cybersecurity awareness talks to organizations or to groups or to other things.
I think there's another layer that you have to slice into that about the why, about where they're coming from with it, because the practitioners that we speak to are many walks of life. A lot of it is traditional IT, where I'd say, the easy lift really is like that 90% of organizations that just need to stop keeping things in text files on users' computers and lift it into a centrally managed place. And we build a lot of business features out for that.
That would be security. You really want people to do secure coding and secure architecture. Come on, man. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so like we jump to the wrong thing sometimes with that. And so it's just about helping centralize that and give this organizational type management of that. And we have these things called collections that users can manage in dynamic ways so that the right people have access to the right things, but can't necessarily take it out of the Bitwarden vault and so on. But I think maybe more so towards what you're going for is that it wasn't so, as we see it, about managing passwords or not, but about using a solution that they trust or works for them. And the way we go after that is we have a self-hosted offering. It's a big part of the open source methodology as well. Take our whole product and just run it inside your own walls. And we would know if you were running it or not, essentially, because you could be in a bunker in an air-gapped environment in the ground and run a Bitwarden server on your NAS in a Docker container and do your thing. And we would have no problem with that whatsoever because it's just a local connection doing your thing. So I think it's been more about how does IT keep the ownership, and it's not about SaaS and cloud all the time, but about really keeping it for themselves. And I feel like we mostly answer that. We're not doing anything decentralized per se. That's a little bit out there for us, but there are solutions that can do that as well. But I think it's really about bringing the in-house offering.
Yeah, Matt. I with password managers, I have two concerns. Right, one is putting all my eggs in one basket. Still to this day, I'm like, all right, if I got to remember 3 sets of credentials, right? Maybe my master password being one of them. That's cool. I'm still just paranoid like that. I don't think that's a knock on the password vaults, right? That's just like a paranoid security person. The other concern, and I know we've covered this in the show in years past, and I don't remember where we left off in terms of the password ending up on the clipboard. And I do also remember there being technology to help protect that. Does that exist, man, or is that still kind of like a risk for users?
Yeah, it is. And we allow organizations and even individual users to manage the security controls about where things are able to be moved from. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse game sometimes, because if you allow somebody to autofill a password, a bad actor may or may not be able to intercept some kind of clipboard content. So, the answer varies on the platform, but I like to think we do our best for managing that. So there's a lot of policies and controls that depend on the platform for what you can do, where we will actively clear clipboard contents after usage or after a certain period of time. So there's that in-memory state. And one of the biggest things that I think I focus on almost every day is some of our security principles, like how when we have a locked vault, your contents are safe. They're not in memory. They're not something that can be exfiltrated. And users do have to a degree, manage their own local system well enough, but we always try to do our best to keep the vulnerabilities away from that sort of thing. So my answer does kind of vary based on what you're running. Some platforms better than others, but we try to offer the best hardware connectivity when we can. So we try to hook into biometrics whenever possible, so that it's not so much, you mentioned master password, like that one magic thing that gives you all the eggs that are in the basket. It doesn't have to be that per se. So we've done a lot of work really in the last year or two about adoption of alternative login mechanisms to go to what we think is a passwordless future. So it could be biometric. Biometric is somewhat weak actually by some standards. So does that mean you bring what is referred to as a passkey It could be a hardware device. It could be something that's just built into your machine. It could interact. There's some cool stuff like Apple does where it can use your iPhone to use Face ID, all these cool permutations of it. But I think we try to offer opportunity for how you control your world a little bit there so that the anxiety of the eggs all being in that basket is maybe a little bit deferred.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the options for multi-factor authentication. I did have some hardware tokens. I found those to be super inconvenient, right? But obviously security and convenience is a trade-off. And I switched to an authenticator app, and I like the push notification second factor to the phone. I use Android, right? So it pushes to the phone. It's like, hey, you sure this is you? So it can act as the physical thing, and I usually have my phone close by.
Yeah.
Where sometimes, like, my physical token, like, oh, that's in the other part of the house, right? Or in my bag. Yeah.
Well, I'd really like
Sam?
to see one where you have to use biometrics every time you fetch a password, because I consult for a corporation and they say, do not put the password in a home password manager. And we had a pen tester on here about a year ago, and they said, when I'm pen testing and I find a password manager, I say, oh, great, then I can easily steal everything. So I tried it, and in most of them, the entire vault is sitting decrypted in RAM right there all the time, available to any process. And so I'd really like to see that be encrypted and be decrypted just once when you need it, but then you'd have to keep putting in your master password. So biometrics does seem like the best answer. I'll show it my face in order to use the password every time.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of natural trade-offs to all these scenarios about how long do you keep what we call your vault unlocked. Is it time-based? Is it every single time? We can allow you to ratchet that down to be as tight as possible. We're not keeping things insecurely in memory to the best of our abilities for the platform, but I think people get fatigued from that just the same, and then it becomes that age-old trade-off problem of how interactive
then you're weakening the master password because it's asking you for it every hour, right? And I've been in situations like that.
Yeah, but I think if you want to be super picky, it would be safer to write your password down in a book on a piece of paper and not have it on your computer at all and just type it in every time. That would probably be safer from a lot of attacks.
Well, and I think you have to manage risk on your own, Sam, to your point, right? So we understand what the technology does. We understand some of the limitations, and no software is perfectly secure. So, like, you have to manage that. And I think it goes back to, like, some passwords I just remember, right? I don't keep in the vault, and that's everyone's risk profile is going to be different.
But so I want to address what Sam just said. Like that depends a lot on context, Sam, right? So like if you're in your house, that fine, right? But if you're in an office, that's very different, right? So if that book is hidden behind a little wafer lock, no, right? I'd much rather it be in a password manager, even if it is fully decrypted in memory all day long, right? Like, so context matters a lot there.
Yeah.
Matt, I want to transition because like I said, I've got a long history in sysadmin, and SSH keys are yet another thing that needs to be managed. And Bitwarden has just released a free tool for managing SSH keys. Tell us how that works, and also how it's different from the kind of included open source software SSH agent.
Yeah. This is hot off the press too. So in the last this release that happened within the last week or so has pushed this out. We've been beta testing it. We're always trying to find new ways to engage the community again, to like try things out, see where we can have subject matter experts try things out here and there. And SSH keys are now generally available and then are rolling out client by client. But the gist with that is, and you can manage these anywhere on our web vault, on our desktop apps, etc., is to store SSH keys. We can generate them right into automatically when you create a new one, or you can import one. There's different flows depending on what you need. And then the agent is that local capability where our desktop app acts as the agent itself. So
I see. Okay.
Depending on your platform, you basically just check a box in your settings, and an agent is then available that you configure to be your agent of choice. And of course, the process very different: Windows, Linux, Mac. But you get in there and you.
So on Linux, I can like probably keep my config file where I have all the definitions of all the hosts that I access. And since SSH agent is running tied to the Bitwarden SSH vault, it'll do that pretty seamlessly.
You point to a socket that the agent makes available, and then it becomes that interstitial access. And so essentially all our rules would apply. If you want to get to that SSH key, the private key material, you'll need to do whatever you need to do to unlock your vault as if you're interacting with one of our traditional login items. And so,
You're
that whole
reducing the
flow.
attack surface. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And it's a way for you using this secure tool to get access to that, because frankly, a lot of traditional SSH is, well, my private key is right there in my user directory, and then I just tap into it. The actual deferral of key material to a central location or whatever you may have set up is kind of complicated. So we're trying to get that down to the end user.
No, I like that. You're simplifying the process and reducing the attack surface. This is smart. This makes sense.
And from a even more, I'd say, developer focused angle, we have a secrets manager product that we call it, which could have really already done this today, but it wasn't that user facing thing where it wasn't tailored to the SSH experience. But
it was tailored for developer. That was my question.
Yeah.
So the developer secrets vault can do SSH more for development and operations, not for like an individual user, right?
Yeah, and users had, the very technical ones, mind you, had adopted Secrets Manager to be something for perhaps themselves or for a small home lab or what have you. Right. But maybe that's not always the typical experience, and SSH is just that leading factor that people need just as an end user.
Which, by the way, as developers, you should be using a secrets vault. Even IT admins, right? Secrets vault is a great thing. Oftentimes does not get implemented, right? You're prototyping, developing code, you're using environment variables,
and
you're like, right? Like, and it works, and it's not secure, and you know that. Most developers know that, right? But it's working.
My keys shouldn't be hard coded.
Right.
Yeah. And a secrets vault's the way to go. But my advice, and it's easy for me to sit here in my pulpit and be like, well, you should adopt those early on in the process, because the longer you wait, the harder it is for you to implement a secrets manager. But it's a crucial step, I think, in modern app development today.
Thoroughly agree, because we're trying to make everyday life easier for those engineers, because what happens when you're on a deadline building some kind of program that you need to deploy to a cloud or whatever, and it's like, hey, cloud engineer, can you just go omit this environment variable really quickly for me? And it's just going to be easier. Then it's in somebody's bash history and all these great attacks that we've heard many times. It's so much easier to grab those things.
And there's also like 4 different ways, the last I counted, in AWS that you can implement the concept of a secrets vault.
That's right.
So you're developing apps, you're like, well, which one do I choose? And then if I'm using this AWS product, maybe that doesn't transfer as well. So I've actually kind of been a fan of let's get a third-party secrets manager. That way we can standardize that on all our apps, regardless of where they're deployed.
And again, self-hostable, the same model applies to our secrets manager. Bring it into your own world. We have secrets manager for our secrets manager as Bitwarden. So thinking of those things where you really have to run your own, and then it's what you choose to be, right? And some sysadmins or otherwise are going to go for the heavy air gap solution. Some are perfectly fine using our cloud solution. It's really up to you, but you want to trust it. You want to own it. You want to understand it.
Can I
Mandy,
ask
you have questions?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mandy.
Mandy, then John.
That's okay. I'm curious, in enterprise deployment, have there been any other unexpected benefits from Bitwarden?
Unexpected benefits? I don't know. That's tough to say a little bit. I think what people enjoy most is the end-to-end control. So an enterprise that really does it well to me has some end device capabilities, so that the iPhones that maybe they issue for their company and their Windows laptops and just that whole system is managed well, and so they can say, hey, because we control our Bitwarden installation, we're going to really manage how that works everywhere. So you're going to use this version of the Bitwarden desktop app, and it works with this version of the mobile app, and it's going to connect to our Bitwarden server with the API running behind a VPN, and kind of dogfooding that whole experience within that maybe they didn't quite realize at first if they were just a cloud customer. But more generally, I think enterprises, even using our cloud, enjoy the organizational capabilities that they get out of it more than anything. So that an admin can go in and say, this guy, because it's not one big vault that has everything in it for everybody. You really control that access mechanism. And so,
Yeah.
hey,
And
this,
I like it like in place of like, yes, you should do identity management, but that's like a different thing than like product companies in cybersecurity, as an example, like the company I work for. You'll generally have other products that you're standing up in a lab environment that you're doing development on. You'll have development instances of your own product. And how do you manage credentials for those? Like, you almost don't want to have your central identity management be the access vehicle for those things, because a lot of times, like, there's stuff that needs to be vulnerable on purpose that needs to sit in the lab. And so a solution like Bitwarden, right, can help manage those credentials to be like, oh, I stood this vulnerable thing up in the lab. You still need to log into it to do stuff. And by the way, just go into the Bitwarden vault and get creds for that. And don't use your federated identity for your company to do that. So you can have some separation there.
And we hook into those things where possible. So maybe my final big thing for the enterprise is the other hooks that they could put into it. So we have a smaller side product offering called Key Connector that allows you to bring your own key management system and then allow single sign-on and other things for that, so that it's not about that master password. You can eliminate the master password with Key Connector, but we have exporters as well. Sync all of your event data to Azure Sentinel or Splunk and get insights into what people are doing with those sorts of things. So I think a lot of enterprises have seen the value and in the connectivity of those experiences to take Bitwarden to other places.
That's awesome, Matt. We didn't get a chance to talk about passkeys, the passwordless.dev or the credential exchange. Perhaps we'll have to bring you back.
Yeah, sure.
To cover those things, but they're all, there's a bunch of other topics that we wanted to discuss. I'd like to do a dive into passkeys. Because I think it's super cool, and I think it's largely not well understood because it's still kind of new.
And it's the future in a lot of ways. We kind of bucket that into this passwordless future where you're getting away from needing to remember that one key piece of information. And this is a little bit sci-fi, but we as an identity, we are this thing, and that is how we authenticate ourselves, right? Like, me because you know me. And how do we become a little more human with how we get access to our systems through things like biometrics or otherwise? And so I think passkeys are this enablement mechanism to get away from what we think of what a password is today.
Yeah, completely agree. Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks for joining us on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me.
IT professionals, mark your calendars. Zero Trust World 2025 is happening in Orlando, Florida, February 19th to the 21st. This event is tailored for IT leaders and cybersecurity experts who want actionable insights on zero trust strategies, practical solutions for modern threats, and meaningful connections with industry peers. Plus, take advantage of hands-on cyber hero boot camps, expert-led sessions, and the chance to earn CPE credits and your cyber hero certificate. Save $200 on your in-person registration using discount code ZTWSW25 at securityweekly.com/ZTW2025. Reserve your spot now. And in the security news this week, lots of stories to cover. I guess I'll start with my story number 10, which I was super excited about to release last week. It was research that I helped a little bit, mostly Mickey and Jesse on our Eclipsium research team did this research. And this was specific to Palo Alto PAN-OS based firewalls. And it's kind of like been a trend that we've been working on at Eclipsium, that when we look under the covers in a lot of these devices, and not just at the operating system, but what's the UEFI look like in devices that are deployed that aren't PC servers and desktops? You might have saw we also did like a DNA sequencer. Discovered the DNA sequencer had vulnerabilities in UEFI. So the Palo Alto one is very interesting. I have opinions, but I'll try and stick to facts. I don't want it to seem like I'm shaming any vendors as well, because like I said, DNA sequencer as an example, this is not an uncommon problem as we're discovering. So basically, we looked at the vulnerabilities kind of below the operating system, right? And I thought it was kind of ironic that the two researchers, Mickey and Jesse, that discovered the boot hole vulnerability. So this is a vulnerability in the Grub2 bootloader. That then, after more investigation, they found more vulnerabilities in the Grub2 bootloader code. The two folks that found it discovered that the version of the Grub bootloader on select models of Palo Alto firewalls was vulnerable.
Hmm.
And the vulnerability in Grub 2 that was dubbed boot hole allows attackers to bypass secure boot. So the interesting thing there is Palo Alto and a lot of device appliance vendors are actually in a great position to implement secure boot because they can only have to issue keys for like their software. It's a smaller environment. The user's not going in there and mucking around with stuff. So they can say like, look, you've got these keys signed, this software, and this is the software that should run. The problem was Palo Alto had secure boot enabled and it was using a vulnerable Grub bootloader and didn't update the revocation list or DBX. Had they done that, it would have said, you're running a vulnerable version of Grub, I can't boot the system, right? So they needed to take the additional steps. Like security is a process, it's an ongoing thing. It's not just, it's not just a point in time, right? Time moves on, and if you don't keep up with things like this, it leads to this type of vulnerable situation. So they discovered that the Grub was vulnerable, that secure boot had not been updated on the devices. So it was still booting the vulnerable Grub bootloader. What that means is Palo Alto actually, in their documentation in 2020, that's when boot hole was disclosed, Palo Alto was like, well, an attacker would need root level access, and even sysadmins shouldn't have root level access to Palo Alto devices. However, vulnerabilities and associated exploits have come out where a remote attacker can get root level access through vulnerabilities in the web management interface. So using one of those vulnerabilities, we put together a demo that's like, if your firewall is vulnerable and an attacker can exploit the vulnerability, then they can exploit the Grub bootloader and then bypass secure boot to then implant code before the operating system loads. Again, the original Palo Alto statement was like, well, no one should have root access. It's like, well, there's vulnerabilities. There's 0-day vulnerabilities. Like you can't, it's this this notion, the threat model to me, I think is outdated, right? And it's interesting and somewhat ironic
Like
that
how
the threat
so?
model from firewall companies is the hard and crunchy outside and soft and chewy center, which is what we used to say when we deployed firewalls but didn't fix stuff in our internal network. Now, and it's not just Palo Alto, it's all the vendors as well. I'm naming and shaming specific companies. I think it's just a general threat model where they sell an appliance and they're like, well, as long as you don't expose it to the internet and you patch all the external stuff, like, don't worry about the vulnerabilities that are on the inside. And I'm like, I thought this is like 20-year-old thinking that we matured from. So to me, the threat model is flawed. I mean, they also tell, customers to use best practices to secure your management interfaces on your firewall when they're not following best practices to secure the appliances. And this is, again, multiple vendors have signed the Secure by Design pledge from CISA. Inside of that pledge, it literally says that you will generate an SBOM for your product, and that SBOM will include firmware. And had you done that, we all would have seen that your firmware is out of date. And so you signed a pledge to do best practices, but you recommend your customers do these best practices, but you're not doing them. That's kind of my take, right? I think, and again, I don't want to name and shame Palo Alto. They're working on fixes for it. We did a shorter disclosure process than we normally do because they recognized they had the vulnerability in 2020, right? So they've had 4 years. They basically already did the disclosure for this one. And so that's why you'll see a much shorter disclosure timeline. But this is, I think, an industry-wide problem where our threat models are just backwards.
So I'm curious, so this research, first of all, you shared it with us, kind of as it was going on or
tongue
whatever.
in cheek,
But
yeah,
yeah,
kind of like
but so it's a little outside of my particular knowledge base. But if you knew that you have an appliance or a server or whatever running that particular version of Grub, that vulnerable version of Grub, I would assume that this exploit that Eclipsium has developed with some modification would you could target other systems as well, right? Like, am I?
Yeah, the exploit would work on any system that was vulnerable to Grub and allow you to bypass secure boot.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Remember, I mean, don't these exploits require physical access?
These do not.
Well, so I think that's Paul's point there, Josh, right? So like that's immediately where my brain went too. Like, well, my Palo Alto's in a data center that's got literal guys with machine guns standing out front, right? Like, but I think that's Paul's point is with this one, just given what we've seen with attacks that have been happening on network infrastructure over the last couple of years,
Yeah, remote exploits exist, and through the remote exploit, you can then exploit the bootloader and then be stealthy and persistent, perhaps across firmware updates, right? And have attackers persist on the system. It's also kind of, Palo Alto wrote a response, which I linked to in the show notes. And it's kind of one of my other gripes too, as I believe, I could be wrong because we haven't necessarily tested this, but I have other evidence that supports my argument, is that one of the vulnerabilities we found in UEFI was insecure spy flash permissions, right?
Right.
So your UEFI BIOS is actually stored on a spy flash that lives on your system, right? Now, actually, I give Palo Alto credit. There's actually 2 spy flashes on the system. So, like, if one gets corrupt, it can fail back to the other one. In enterprise systems, I love that. I think that's a great thing to have. But with insecure spy flash permissions, Palo Alto said, well, PanOS is not vulnerable to this, and kind of pitched someone would need physical access, but even at that, there would be roadblocks. And there are roadblocks to physical attacks against Palo Alto firewalls, for sure. I don't know if I can elaborate on that quite yet, but there's mitigations there. However, if I think that Palo Alto saying is like built into PanOS, there's no software that would let an attacker interface with the spy flash device. Now, what we saw in the Sophos attacks in Pacific Rim were attackers that gained root level access to a firewall, downloaded a remote tool called FlashROM, which does let you interface with the spy flash, and used that to make modifications to UEFI because protections were not in place. So that's kind of my argument. I don't have like hard evidence to back that up. I haven't proved that particular point. So there might be other mitigations. It might be either really hard or impossible to do. But given that we saw this similar kind of thing happen to another firewall vendor, I want to see them secure the platform, right? I mean, that's really what I'm advocating for. I don't want anyone to feel bad. I want anyone to hide vulnerabilities. I don't want anyone to name and shame vendors that have vulnerabilities. I want to see everyone fix them, right? And not just the ones that are remotely exploitable. I want to see you secure the platform, because why give the attackers the advantage, right? If they're going to get a foothold, you got to put barriers in place so they can't embed themselves deeper on the system. I just want to see better platform security across the board.
Yeah, and like it or not, but security vendors need to be held to a higher standard. Like they need to be the the standard of how software applications are built.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I think I said this before, and I was briefing someone else today, and the SDLC, Secure Development Lifecycle, the secure development practices have been honed greatly, especially like in the past. I think I traced it back to like 8 or 9 years when I created the shows Application Security Weekly, Business Security Weekly, and Enterprise Security Weekly. We did a lot of interviews and covered like in depth how you secure that process, right? Like there should be something that when developers are writing code is doing static analysis. There should be more static analysis checks that when they check in the code. There should be dynamic analysis. There should be unit testing. There should be fuzzing that automatically happens, remote vulnerability scans that happen, so that once the code is shipped, there's this level of checking that, and a lot of experts that have analyzed these devices in particular, right, agree that the vulnerabilities we're finding more than likely could be found with good development practices. Not even great, like just good development practices. I mean, when I looked at I linked to the article, I didn't write it up. As an example, my story number 6 is a Fortinet device, and the exploit was written up by Watchtower Labs. And like when you read some of, I don't know if it was this one or other ones, I'm like, I feel like I'm reading Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit by Alf-1. Well, when was that? 80?
Yeah,
Was it 89?
Yeah,
I
right.
think it might have been 89.
Mhm.
Someone on the internet, correct me if I'm wrong, but it not, let's say 90s, right? The buffer overflow was well known. And I read some of these, buffer overflow in the web software that runs on the appliance. And I'm like, this is like a basic Stack overflow. Like you should catch that in your code, right? It was basically a stir n copy they were copying the wrong values into. I'm like, but we have technology that should flag that today. So that's also part of my frustration is do good secure development, right?
What would catch that? Fuzzing?
I think static analysis would
Static
would catch that.
Why? Because it'll see that you're using stir-n copy. Now, how is it going to determine that it's the wrong value?
I think static analysis can determine it's the wrong value because I want to say that our static analysis engine at Eclipsium caught that in some UEFI code. That was UEFI can has buffer overflow was the wrong value being set for the buffer.
That's good. Are they using a particular tool? Is that check marks or what?
It wouldn't work with check marks.
There are actually some open source implementations that can catch that. Static analysis tools that can catch that.
Good. What about web vulnerabilities? I was looking at your story number 5, and it's again pretty hilarious.
Yeah, the hacking the Subaru thing. Yeah, this was Sam Curry's research. And I didn't read this one in depth. I just did like a high level, but I mean, it's basically the API web backend, right? Is vulnerable. The application's vulnerable. And correct me if I'm wrong. This lets you interface with like any Subaru.
Yeah, it lets you change passwords on any existing account without an authentication token. And then when they log in, it has 2-factor authentication, but all you have to do is go in the browser and delete the overlay, and the administration panel behind it works.
Wow.
So that's just outrageous.
Yep.
And I'm not quite sure what sort of scanning would detect this kind of error. It's like a fundamental logic flaw. It reminds me of the San Francisco parking meters where you would ask the card whether you have enough money and believe what the card tells you. So by just making a malicious card, you'd always have more money.
Right. Yeah. Logic errors are still in web interfaces tough to catch. I want to say the technology has evolved. Years ago, we spent a lot of time talking about web scanning and web scanning technology, and it certainly got better, but it's tough to find those logic flaws, right? Usually that's a human finding those logic flaws. But the tools are, are getting better. I hate to say it, but AI has some promise in a lot of these areas that we've struggled with, right? Scraping, fuzzing, vulnerability analysis. We're in the kind of infancy stages. So a lot of the tech that we've looked at to help solve those challenges where you need a human and it's difficult to automate, web scraping being one, they're not quite there yet, but it's showing promise and it's getting better. And I think we will get to a point where we can solve some of these automation challenges with the help of Gen AI.
Well, then maybe we should talk about Deepseek. I mean, it's the big news. And maybe you guys know more than I do. I mean, the early reports are that the Chinese are able to make something as smart as our smartest model at less than 1% of the cost. And if that's true, then we're nothing but a bunch of idiots over here wasting all this money.
Except it helps when you start with a head start.
Well,
they pulled from OpenAI. They already snagged some of the OpenAI proprietary models. So
how did they get them? By stealing with corporate espionage, or by just doing queries over the internet?
The Chinese doing corporate espionage? Oh my God, this is my shocked face.
Yeah, that's their MO.
So you think they just cloned OpenAI's advanced model?
No. Look, admittedly, they did some amazing work on optimizing and making it more efficient. I absolutely agree with that. OpenAI is the what's the right way to put this? Oh, I've got it. OpenAI is the classic example of somebody going, "I've got something. How do I make it better? More power." And they just
Right.
they just add more GPUs and
Right.
more GPUs and more GPUs
That's right.
to make it better.
That's the fundamental problem. We're just like hitting things with a big hammer here. And we just announced we're going to spend $500 billion making giant data centers for AI. And China
Big
strongly
hammers.
suggests that we could just be smarter about
Mm.
using the hardware we have and save a ton of money. So every company, I think, is scrambling, saying, like Microsoft, our plan was to invest $80 billion next year, and maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah. Maybe we should just be smarter about it and use less resources.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, have you ever seen the show called Junkyard Wars? It was a long time ago. Okay.
Yeah.
They had 3 teams. They had an American team, a British team, and a Russian team. And they had them design vehicles to go over water and land and everything else. And the British team had like a Land Rover with a V6 in it. And the Russian team had this like boat, motorcycle, triple wheel abomination that worked pretty well. And the American team was just like, screw it. They found a V8 monster truck in the junkyard and made it run again and put like foam boxes around it. And they just powered through everything. Okay.
Yeah,
And that's basically what we're seeing here. We're seeing
Right.
that the Americans said, let's add more crap to it.
Yeah.
And the Chinese team said, okay, that's cool. Can we have the engine schematics, please?
Well, I
And
think
now
it's
let's
also a
more efficient.
logical conclusion that as we start to understand how these systems work and what's important, that we will be able to make them more efficient, right? And we will be able to. Josh, your point is apt, right? Like that does tend to be the way the Americans act, is just go, right? Like put, but 10 more, 10 more data centers, please, right? And we're buying nuclear reactors to power these things, right? Like that does, I agree with you. But I also think it's also probably just, we have to understand that every,
Grab Greenland to cool them.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I just bumped my mic, but
Sorry.
like at the pace that AI is moving and accelerating every day, that some of the breakthroughs that are going to occur are going to be efficiency.
Yeah, for sure. But also there's the privacy angle too. I don't know if you run EFF's privacy badger and you go to Deepseek AI, like there's a few Chinese websites in there that they're getting blocked by privacy badger. So there's also the privacy angle, the data angle as well. But Deepseek, like Llama, you can run locally as well.
Right. And I had some friends that ran it locally, and wire sharking all along the way, and didn't see anything that seemed out of place. Right. Like, again, running the LLM locally is something very different than going to the website. But
right. But if it's more efficient, then you can run it locally.
Yeah.
Deepseek is also very nice to demonstrate how security barriers work, because you can ask it about a forbidden topic. Like I asked it, how should America prepare for war against China? And it filled the whole page with like a 10-step plan that was excellent. And like step 8 was support democracy in Taiwan. And it displayed the whole page. And then suddenly the whole page vanishes and it said, oops, I can't talk about that. Wow. And that reveals how it works. You can't give an AI a security boundary. It doesn't learn.
But that's you have to. Do you get that if you run it locally, though?
Oh, I don't know. I know some people ran it locally and removed the censorship.
Yeah,
But
that's what I like about the open models. I think that's why Zuckerberg released Llama, because he's like, look, and he runs one of the largest corporations in the world. He's like, large corporations and governments shouldn't be controlling this technology. And say what you will about Meta and Zuckerberg, but he did Rogan, I think, twice. And whether you like Rogan's podcast, whether you like Zuckerberg or not, I'm a big fan of like collecting information. I want to hear what he has to say, right? And that's why I love podcasting in the open platforms, because they sat down for hours and just talked about stuff. And that was one thing that jumped out at me was he was like, look, these models need to be open. We don't want governments and large corporations controlling the models.
I find it very odd that this timeline where Zuckerberg is the person that we trust and Elon is nuts, right? Like it's just so wild to me that like that is even a possibility that those words came out of my mouth.
I've never heard of anybody trusting Zuckerberg, but
right.
but the thing I thought was interesting about this Chinese model is you can see the important issue, which is security barriers do not come from AI. The security barrier is doing like a keyword search using some normal technology like C or Python.
Yep.
And that's why it works this way, because they really can't do the scan until after they generate the output. And if they make you wait that long, everyone will say, gee, this is too slow. So I think it's a real issue for the security of AI.
Sam, I'm curious, do you know more about distillation?
No.
That's apparently the process. Oh, okay. That's the process that OpenAI is saying that Deepseek used in order to, it says distillation does not expose a model's inner workings and can be used by developers to improve their applications. However, OpenAI's terms of service bar users from using the data obtained through distillation to build competing AI products.
Now the latest podcast of cryptography, security, whatever.
Security, cryptography, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about stealing parameters from models. And he explains how it works very well. But
was that Nicholas? Is that the...
Yeah, I'm from the name of the guy, but he explained how you steal the parameters out of models to clone them. And it's a very complicated process and not practical against a big model like OpenAI.
Right.
So
it's not. It's huge. But the distillation process, if I understand it correctly, and I'm not sure I know this term properly, is that Deepseek uses only a portion of its parameters at any given time, and it only uses a portion of its data at any given time.
Oh, yes, there are some known techniques that work like that. And that's from one common efficiency technique. That's true.
And remember that in a RAG model, the model data is how to answer questions, and then the collections is the data that it answers the questions from. And I'm sorry.
The paper, the reports I read said that they actually trained it on a very small set of data and with interactive feedback. They did not train it on the huge pile.
And it says they claim they used a couple thousand reduced capacity chips.
Yeah. Of course, other people say they're just lying and they don't want to admit they had the greatest chips they're not allowed to have because of an embargo. So I don't know.
Well,
they were NVIDIA chips.
Yeah. So my colleagues who work for agencies, that's what they believe. So, yeah.
That they really have 15,000 of the latest NVIDIA chips and they're just lying about it.
Yeah, that's what they believe. But I don't know. Like we're in such a political nightmare. Is China a friend or a foe, or what are they right now? You have no idea.
Well, I would say one thing I'd say is our policy of trying to isolate America and embargo China is a massive failure. We have not succeeded in holding them back.
For sure.
I think it was a lot better before this when we had open exchange and visiting scientists and DEF CON in China and all that. I was a lot happier with that than this current ramping up hostility stuff.
Yeah, I just happier as an individual contributor, but I'm going to tell you that it was still going on. Trust me, okay?
But I think, even in the context of cybersecurity, when we look at embargoes, they largely just don't really work.
It only work if we actually think China doesn't have like intelligent people to invent this stuff or the technical capacity to manufacture their own chips. And that is clearly not true.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're tough to enforce. There's a lot of ways around them. And does it really get the end result?
In a way, we're doing them a favor by getting them to ramp up their own capacity and not depend on us.
Right. I mean, we debated on, SCAR podcast, does the Cuban embargo actually have an impact?
Good impact.
Did it?
Yeah.
And in that case, it might, right? Because they export rum and cigars to largely Europe, China, Japan, right? The countries that don't have the embargo. If they were able to do that in the U.S., they might have a more flourishing economy.
Yeah.
And they make really good cigars and rum, too.
They do?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Havana Club. Do you ever have Havana Club rum? It's like their house brand rum.
No,
if you're going to bring up
Americans.
intoxicants, I want to
We're
mention...
Americans, we drink Budweiser, but like in Cuba, the equivalent to them is like Havana Club, and they probably have like a similar view, like a lot of countries. Like you go to Belgium and you order a Stella, they're like, "Really?
Yeah.
That's like that's not good."
Foster's is Australian for piss. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. ThreatLocker implements a least privilege approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits, and ensures protection for your organization 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker.
You guys are right on topic for my story number 6. This guy huffed computer cleaner. You take computer cleaner and sniff it to get high. People really do this? And of course, it had some horrible effect on him.
Stories. It has nothing to do with cybersecurity, which is, I think, a great diversion for us.
Yes.
It does relate to
His
technology.
insides were super clean.
Yeah. I guess so, yeah. Well, what happened is he got an overdose of fluoride. That you put a small amount of fluoride in the water, it makes your bones stronger. But if you get a large amount, it makes your bones swell and get brittle. So, but who would do this? Who is sniffing computer cleaner? What?
You've never seen mugshots of the huffers?
What is computer cleaner?
Computer cleaner, compressed air.
The canned air. I got you.
Yeah, that's got some kind of chemical in it, and I guess you get
carbons and all the nasty stuff that kills the ozone layer and all that crap. And he's breathing it in like, give me more. Seriously?
But his hands got bigger. That's weird.
Yeah, it makes your bones swell if you get too much fluoride.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I guess I better stop doing that. You know?
That's right. I mean, just drink that whiskey you were talking about. You'll be a whole lot better off.
Stop sniffing glue or canned air.
Canned air.
Yeah.
They said I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing computer cleaner.
Right.
That's right. That's right. When I brought this up in my class, a bunch of people said, "Oh yeah, people do that. We hear about it all the time." I'm like, "Wow."
Well, so like Mandy, go ahead. Mandy, go ahead.
Oh, see, that's been around forever. I mean, I remember middle school, like huffers would have they end up with spray paint because they were using spray paint or adhesives or anything that had an accelerant. Or is that accelerant is the right word?
Yeah.
Propellant is the right word.
Propellants. That's what I was looking for. There we go.
Accelerant is if you're committing arson. Propellant.
Yes. Okay. Let's make sure we get the right terminology for our weird felonies.
Well, I've led a sheltered life. I was not aware of this.
Well, Sam, don't get started now, man. It's really hard to quit once you start. You know?
Yeah, it's true.
I guess.
Somehow I think Sam is safe from the alluring, life of huffing glue. Okay.
Well, I've never tried it, so I guess I shouldn't knock it. But
Sam, if you want to try something, inject heroin. It's better than huffing glue.
Well, speaking of sniffing glue, we should go back and talk about national policies in my story number 14. This might make you want to sniff glue. How's that for a segue?
Terrible.
National security risk and routers modems are targeted in a bipartisan Senate bill.
Well, it sounds good.
Working. Sounds good. Title sounds great. I'm like,
they're just making another agency, right? They're not actually doing anything.
Or maybe enabling agencies already exist from what I read, but they're working at the speed of government. So the article states, if signed into law, the Routers Act would charge the Commerce Department's Assistant Secretary for Communications and Information, that's a title, with overseeing a study of national security risks presented by routers, modems, or devices that combine both technologies and that are designed, developed, manufactured, or supplied by persons owned by, controlled by, or subject to the influence of a covered country.
Sure, it sounds good, but I'm sure Doge is going to cancel it like tomorrow.
Like, we know the answers here.
Yeah, so that's my point, Josh. So I said, look, I can save them a lot of time and money on this study. There's millions of routers connected to the internet. Most are vulnerable. Some will never get patches or updates, and most are manufactured in China. So now let's do something about it. I'll save you a whole ton of money on the study.
I want to point out you're actually not correct. And let me explain why. It's the national security implications, not just the information security implications. Mm-hmm. So what this act is saying is, hey, how many routers are in front of national security information, right? And I get that, but realistically, that's covered under NIST 800-171 and CMMC as well as the
Right.
NISPOM for vendors and various other standards.
It goes in the supply chain.
But it's a supply chain effort.
Yeah.
And so if you look at how data is stored, processed, moved, used, etc., generated at various levels, from don't care about it to CUI to classified stuff, any device this data passes over should be at a certain level of security and should be tested on a regular basis, except for the we don't care about it stuff, because we don't care about it. Again, this is my favorite thing. Lunch menus, have them, don't care. But if they're trying to figure out what that is, there are standards that already cover this. Why are we doing this over again?
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, just annoyed as a compliance guy.
Yep.
I thought it was going to be what I suggested last week. I was like, oh, someone listened to the podcast and they're going to pass legislation.
That's what I thought too.
It was a good grant, my grant funded idea that I had after a few glasses of bourbon last week, which I still think is a great idea.
Somebody wants to pay me to take care of this thing, I will take care of this issue. I will have a paper written up in a few days. I'll charge you consulting rates. It's not a big deal. But I will explain why you're such a friggin' idiot to do this whole thing, this Routers Act.
Drink some more beer and maybe have some more ideas on this subject.
Rock and roll,
maybe
brother.
Not.
Hey, I think we should, going back to the Deepseek thing.
Yeah.
I think we should reference a little bit, at least, this report from the Google Threat Intelligence Group. I think it's my story 2. The report about adversarial misuse of generative AI, because there's some points that are specific on the Threat Intelligence Group releasing what they have seen state-sponsored bad actors doing, including they have some breakdown of what the People's Republic of China has been using Gemini for. They said they show that there's 20 China-backed groups have been observed using Gemini, and notable use cases. I'll summarize. There's reconnaissance, vulnerability research, scripting and development, translation and explanation, and deeper system access and post-compromise actions. And then there was one point. Let me find it again. I don't know if anybody else looked through this, or like Phil Venables or the other
my
blog
brain
reports.
Goes to, if China can build Deepseek, right, they can build models that don't have any guardrails for internal use. And like my use case for this is kind of interesting. So watching this documentary series on Netflix that is talking about like it's the whole series is about terrorism plots that were thwarted before they happened. And I don't know if you remember exactly when you were not allowed to bring liquids on airplanes. It was 2006, right? I think it was so long ago, most of us forgot like that it must have always been like that, because it's been so long, and we always just know we can't bring more than 2.8 ounces or 3 ounces, whatever it is now, of liquids on the airplane. And they went through the entire plot. General Hayden is interviewed. The CIA, like commanding officer for counterterrorism from the CIA, who was working at the time, they must have declassified a lot of this information, because it was pretty well detailed as to how they tracked 18 people in the UK to Al-Qaeda operative that was working in Pakistan, right? But they got into like they were getting large amounts of hydrogen peroxide and Tang packets, like drink packets. They actually targeted one of the people who were involved in the plot, and secretly like went through the person's luggage and found Tang, and I guess the chemical compound. So like now after I watched the episode, I was like, I want to know how you make a bomb out of Tang and hydrogen peroxide. Like, I'm just super curious now, right? This is the hacker in all of us, right?
Yeah, but now Sam's going to huff it.
Now I'm on a list somewhere, right? Yeah. Sam's going to huff it.
Did you ask Deepseek how to make a bomb out of Tang and hydrogen peroxide?
That's what I'm like. I'm already probably on a list now. I'm talking about a podcast. But what if I go start asking like LLMs? Like, I just want to preface it. Like, I'm not trying to build a bomb. I'm just like genuinely curious. Like, what does that process look like? Because this type of explosive led to all of us today not being able to bring liquids on a plane. And there was actually 18 people they targeted, or they actually had selected, I think it was like 8 or 9 flights that were leaving the UK into the US, and simultaneously they were going to explode while in midair and kill thousands of people. And they thwarted that plot.
Sugar is
It's an interesting story, but like, again, like my thing was, I want like details because they didn't give it all in the documentary. But if I can start asking LLMs, like they're not gonna give me that information. Like then my account's gonna get banned. Like it's not even like worth it. I mean, maybe it is, but.
And you have to like trust in it and its in its response that whatever you build doesn't blow up in your face, right? Like,
right. Again, I was not going to prototype this myself. It was just genuine curiosity, right? Because after you watch that, I guarantee you, like any hacker that goes watches that, it's like, I kind of want to know, like, what is the chemical reaction that causes that? Because it's tang, right? It's not like it's like an off the shelf substance.
It's mostly sugar.
That's
right.
Sugar.
Sugar? They said there was some, but they didn't get into details, but just begged me to ask more questions. I'm like, so what is in tang that interacts with the hydrogen peroxide? And then I think there was some other chemical, right?
When you mix sugar and hydrogen peroxide, they make actually a liquid fuel. So if it's strong enough hydrogen peroxide. So, and then at that point, it's a fuel. And then if you mix it with any kind of powdered metal, hydrogen peroxide doesn't react well with powdered metal.
No, we can't. We're gonna get banned now. Now we're banned, dude. We're not on. We can't be on YouTube if we're talking about this.
You can use this for rocket fuel for model
Strike
rocket.
that from the record. Yeah. Strike it from the record. I mean, Facebook's banning posts about Linux, so like now we're talking about explosives. This is gonna be bad.
Are they really banning posts about Linux?
I mean, explosives for years.
Well, I have a theory on that. One last thing on the show I watched, we did drone strike kill the Al-Qaeda operative who was behind that whole plot, by the way, which was, I was like, oh, okay. So Facebook was interesting because it ties back into the bicycle stealing episode of Darknet Diaries. Mm-hmm. At the very end of that episode, they said something very concerning because they had evidence of like not just one or two people that was stealing stuff and put it on Marketplace. They had evidence of like this multinational cartel of stolen goods that would ultimately end up on Facebook Marketplace and were being sold. Like the stolen goods were being sold at a clip of like one post a day on Facebook Marketplace. Stolen goods that ended up being like in Mexico, and they never got the guy, but they went to Facebook through official and unofficial channels. It was like, hey, we can literally hand you all of the evidence you need to get rid of accounts and show you all the Marketplace postings where people are, with the evidence we have, 100% selling stolen goods on Marketplace. And the gist of Facebook's response was, we're relying on AI to police the content and Facebook Marketplace. So like their Facebook or Meta is putting more stake in automation and AI than they are in actual human beings doing research and collecting evidence and presenting that. And so when we go to the there was what's his name? John Hammond made a post that, so I forget who posted. It might have been Mandy. Was it you, Mandy, or someone else? Sam? It might have been Sam. John Hammond was like, people who posting on Facebook, like DistroWatch, had posts removed, and the reasoning was that it was Linux, and Linux is tied to malware, and that content is no longer allowed on Facebook. Now everything's like okay, but I think that was an AI automation model gone wrong, and someone dialed it back because YouTube has 100% done the same thing to us specifically years ago. When we used to call it hack naked news or whatever. I don't know what triggered it. No one would tell me what triggered it because they don't want to tell you how it all works. But we had problems with content.
Oh, yeah, I did too. Yeah, YouTube took a bunch of my stuff down and threatened to cancel my account and everything. And I really strongly felt like it was an AI. And when I managed to get through to a human, they would cancel this. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of us have fallen victim to, you posted about how to hack things and therefore you can't have content there.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you mention anything about a vaccine, they'll trigger you as medical misinformation, whether what you say is true or false, because they have a dumb AI that just says, oh, they said something about a vaccine.
Yep. Not allowed.
Now,
hey, well, one good note.
Now they just put an informative note saying, here's the official government information about vaccines instead of banning you, which is a whole lot better in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Man, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to say on the malware thing, one good thing about the Google report at this point is they said, we still don't see creation of sophisticated or previously unseen malware, meaning like the state-sponsored actors using the generative AI. And that, I don't know why reading that kind of changed my mindset on thinking about the possibilities of the intensive malware that generative AI could produce.
Well, it's got to base it on the malware that exists, and it's hard for Gen AI to come up with new things. It has to base it on what happened in the past. So getting it to learn or generate new things is super hard.
Difficult.
No, that's a real important statement. All AI is plagiarism. All it can do is copy what it's seen. It can't create anything new.
It can.
No, that's well, you know, that ties into my .ass story.
To be clear,
yes.
one last
which is a great video. That is a great video.
Extrapolate.
Yes,
it does mostly the most popular answers. So Sam, in total, you're right, but it can infer, it can extrapolate. I'm not trying to be rude to it, but anyway, but yeah, the .ass story is the most beautiful thing.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because like when you first read it, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. If you put a video on YouTube and you give it subtitles, AI can go consume those subtitles and basically use that as a prompt to create the same exact video and rip off the video. I'm like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. Like that's a perfectly acceptable or not acceptable usage of AI, right? But it's within the context of the technology. But there's another subtitle format, and it stands for Advanced Substation Alpha, or .ass, which like the story just writes itself from that point. And what they do is they use this other format because you can put different metadata basically in the subtitle format to customize orientation, formatting, fonts, colors, and other things. And what people figured out is if they put garbage in the .ass subtitle files, the AI will consume it and not be able to rip off the content, which also just like makes like this is all just common sense, right?
I wonder how they I mean, and I didn't read the article, but I wonder, how do you prove that that the AI was unable to steal your content? Like, I wonder how.
Right.
But you're right. Like, and so like how, like with things like YouTube, is like an AS file something that you upload? I'm not familiar with that process. Right. Like
it's for like formatting your subtitles and stuff, I think.
Yeah, I think
okay.
I'm 99% sure in platforms such as YouTube, you can upload your own subtitle file.
Can we please call it AS? You can upload your AS.
Well, .srt is the other format that I'm familiar with.
But
unfortunately, I just like side note, on different platforms, it won't import my subtitles correctly, because platforms like Riverside and others, I mean, there's lots of software now because of AI largely, right? That everything can generate speech to text. I mean, speech to text was a technology that existed probably. I mean, there were probably computer scientists that did speech to text in the 70s. Like it was probably something really early on. I don't pretend to know when it first started, but now you look at it today, everyone can do it. It's a commodity type of technology and process. And you can upload that into many different platforms and supply your own subtitles.
And so, I mean, this would be easy for the AI companies to circumvent. It reminds me of the technology for artists that puts some distortion in your art to stop AI from copying your art. And again, it'll only work for a brief period of time until they implement a countermeasure.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, it's like scrambled porn back in the days of satellite dishes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You learn. Never mind. I'm not going there. Anyway.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of DRM, there's a great security, cryptography, whatever episode about the implementation of DRM, smart cards, and that whole thing. Absolutely fascinating. Where's it? Oh, I want to see another thing about AI not learning new things, because I'm running up against this coding in C++ for the ESP32, like I've reached a point where I've taken someone else's code, right? And like my code's open source, their code's open source, so it's going to carry the same license, right? And because they did a nice job of creating libraries in a platform IO to support multiple devices, and everything was going great until, and I was using a GPT in ChatGPT to help me generate some of the code and get examples. And I'm going along. I'm like, things are going great. Now I'm at the point I want to build my own menu and be able to catch when someone pushes the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is where the AI fell down, because I was like, how do I do that? And they're like, oh, you need to import this library and do it this way. I'm like, yeah, but that's not compatible with the libraries and the structure that I have now that does a nice job of compiling it for all
And then
these
it's
different
like, you are
platforms.
correct. You need to do it. And then it tells you the exact same thing.
And it's exactly what it did, Bill. It's
Yeah.
exactly what it did. I was like, go to this. Like, I did this project and I linked it to the GitHub of the M5 Stack Launcher. Talented developer, like awesome project. And I'm like, I did this project and I took some of that structure. So I'm like, tell me how to implement the menu, but use that person's GitHub and what they did. And it still just comes back. It's like, you need to import this other library. I'm like, no. I need to use his library structure, which I don't fully understand. Can you explain it to me? And then it tries to summarize it, and then it says, "Oh, you need to like import this other library." I'm like, "No, like just forget it, forget it."
So we've been saying this for months. Like, I think that AI is incredibly helpful in development, but you have to already be a developer for it to
correct.
Like, because like there are certain parts that it'll crank out, and you're like,
it just doesn't understand.
And then
it doesn't have that logic and reasoning. And a lot of the code up to this point that I copied, I've had to like, no, I need to put it there. I need to put it there. If I get an error, it's great at leading me in the right direction. I mean, sometimes actually just telling me flat out what the error is and how to fix it.
That's what I use. Is mostly for error. Like, I'll copy the error and paste it in there, and then like, hey, tell me what this means. Oh,
right. At the very least, it gives me great suggestions and leads me down the right path. And so I the latest iteration build of the project, which is based off you and Larry's code as well, is like I broke everything out into separate libraries because I had to, because now I have to catch like touchscreen things. So I have to have like functions and libraries. And then I had like recursive includes, and I was getting errors of type definitions. Like I was defining things twice, and it helped me sort that mess out. Like it definitely, I probably solved those problems twice as fast because I had an assistant like helping me with that. But now I'm like, now I'm still combing through code manually, going, okay, how do I do this? I almost want to reach out to the developer. He writes great. I mean, this project is awesome. The M5 Stack Launcher.
Oh yeah.
So if you're doing ESP32 stuff, which is a good segue, I got this T embed from LilyGo. This is the CC1101 version.
Oh, cool.
Which supports the Bruce firmware.
Yeah.
And it's got a nice little jog wheel. The CC1101 version of the T embed also comes with a battery in the fancy case. And it's got a jog wheel and a select button on it.
It was like $50,
which is awesome. I don't remember what these went for. Around there.
Yeah.
They weren't terribly expensive. Yeah, so that's really cool. But also on the ESP32 front, something that I think is
big news, man.
Yeah, I think this is exciting, right? So the ESP32 C5
your story 18
is the what?
Your story 18.
Yeah, my story number 18. So we're getting closer to have. So up to this point, we've only had a 2.4 gigahertz radio on all the ESP32 devices and the FlipperZero, which is very limiting for the platform. As we want to do Wi-Fi reconnaissance, we want to do Wi-Fi attacks, we're limited to 2.4 gigahertz. Most modern Wi-Fi networks, right? I mean, they're probably dual band, but interfacing with the 5 gigahertz is kind of where it's at today, because we've standardized on that 5 gigahertz frequencies. And so I have like a mini FAQ. So really quick, the ESP32 C5 is RISC-V based, and we'll have both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. So for developers, I actually prompted Perplexity to help answer these questions, because I was like, if I have code that's written for the what is the processor? It's Tensia.
Yeah, I don't recall right offhand, but
what is it? Hold on, I have it.
Tensilica?
Yes, Tensilica Extensa 32-bit LX6 and LX7 processors that comprise the ESP32s available in the market today. The C5 will use a RISC-V based processor. And so when I prompted the AI, I was like, all right, so what do I need to do as a developer? And like, basically you need to recompile your code, but also you need to make sure that you update your ESP IDF.
yeah.
So that's the foundational libraries and code that you need to have, like whether you're on Arduino or Platform IO, Espressive IDF is underneath, and you can code right in Espressive IDF directly as well. But so that library, my guess, will need to be updated to support the new platform, and then you'll need to recompile your code because it's a different processor architecture. And like they said, largely your code should transfer. Like obviously there's differences in the architecture. If you're doing like really low level stuff, you're likely going to have to make some changes because different processor. Like you can write code directly on, like you can compile a binary and just run it directly on the hardware without free RTOS as an operating system.
So what does it look like? What does that the C5? Does it just same form factor as a? I'm looking.
It looks like
okay,
the same form factor.
Does,
so in my last bullet there, Andre Spies is a YouTuber that posts about hardware hacking on ESP32. Great channel, by the way. Everyone, if you're interested in that stuff, should definitely subscribe. He got a prototype version and has a video, so you can actually see the prototype build of that chip. So the internet also tells me the latest information based on a forum post on Espressive. Initial support for mass production of the ESP32C5 will be included in the ESP-IDF version 5.5, which is a planned release date of June 30th, 2025. But again, this is the dual band RISC-V ESP32 chips have been talked about for some time. Like if you read back in the history, like I think it's since 2022 or 3, like they've been talking about it coming to market even before that. So
speaking of FlipperZeros and ESP32s, I want to hear about your story number 11. Researchers say that new attack could take down the European power grid.
Dude, this is crazy. And I also wish Larry was here too to help with this one.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Or Lee, some of that. Do you have your ham license, Bill?
No, never.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, and I say never, like I have never got it. I said that like I'd never get it. No, I want it.
I want it. Yeah, same. I think Lee and Larry both are both. And they would have a little more insight, right? So basically,
license
so I don't know if you read my article number 11, Josh, right? But so there are lights in Europe that use outdated technology called radio ripple control, which is using radio frequencies, but they talk about different types of radio frequencies. That the protocol was developed in the early 20th century and still used to manage critical functions of the power grid. So it operates by transmitting unencrypted frequency modulated radio signals to receivers within the grid, lacking any form of encryption or authentication. I think they said, and I think this was, I don't know, like to me, it read in the beginning of the article, like controlling lights, like street lights and all that stuff would speak this radio protocol. And since there is no authentication, and you can transmit using various devices, such as a FlipperZero, they actually did some hacks on the RFID antenna in the 125 kilohertz RFID functionality in the FlipperZero to do that at closer range.
Yeah.
And then they also built out a kit that does it at longer range.
Wow.
But they estimated they can control up to 60 gigawatts of energy, which is more than the entire German power system.
More than that, they can also control the weather forecasts, synchronizing the times and electricity pricing tariffs. There's an entire system using security by obscurity,
right,
to do this because they're obscure protocols. But like, this is terrifying. Absolutely.
Yeah, but like obscure protocols that are transmitting on a radio frequency in today's day and age, not that obscure.
Right.
I mean, because you can pick up a hack RF1 on AliExpress for a couple $100.
This is stupid.
Well, the same thing's true of satellites. Many of them just relied on difficulty getting a receiver, and now the receivers are easy to get. So this is kind of inevitable in technical debt. Anything you made like 10 or 20 years ago was in a whole different environment.
No, this is almost 80 years ago.
Yeah.
So how could this possibly be avoided?
Oh yeah. There's no way we could have known that in 80 years people would make up different technology like software-defined radios and radio receivers across a huge bandwidth that could listen in SDRs on all these different bandwidths and listen to this stuff. And there's no way that when you allow the manufacturers to sell the Ripple receivers on the open market, that could be taken advantage of. Oh. I'm doing my shocked face for those of you who are just listening and not watching.
Yeah, I wonder what else. So this is very, it's different but similar to MERT, right? Like this was controlling the street lights here in the U.S. for a long time, and I wonder what other, like surely there are plenty of critical infrastructure that Sam, I think your point is correct. Like it's worked and we've relied on it for so long, right? Like no one. You have to imagine nobody assumed even, like back then, like that we'd still be using it, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you would imagine that, especially for adding and shedding power loads that, hey, we're going to be still using a system 80 years later or 20 years later or 10 years later. And we know that's, hey, works, don't fix it. Or, it works, don't fix it. Except, we're using unauthenticated protocols to do that. So, wow, that is amazing research for sure.
It took them a year too. The Ars Technica article is really good. But yeah, they said an extensive and painstaking reverse engineering process that took about a year.
Wow.
I always like to highlight that because it's not like it happens in TVs and movies and like the way people think. Like, oh, let me just hack into the grid.
You're right.
Yeah. Right. This was a year of reverse engineering.
Wait, holding a gun to the groin of a hacker.
Right. That's
giving
right.
him 60 seconds
actually doesn't work. Doesn't work.
All of my illusions are shattered. Oh,
right.
It's fascinating that they took a year to figure this out, but now it's going to take anybody else a few hours, a few days. Basically, the worst top part of it is waiting for the receivers to arrive from the store you bought them from. Right. And they can control the electricity grid in all of Germany. And I'd be willing to bet that they use the same system in other places as well.
Yeah, I think they said that in the article, Josh.
Mm-hmm. And how about synchronizing time? Imagine if you're in like I'm going to make some outlandish movie-ish thing here, but you're a serial killer and you're watching a movie or you're at a play, very visibly at a play. You go somewhere immediately after the play, change the time codes, not even joking, on somebody's phone and car and everything else, kill someone and then go back. They literally, it's anti-forensics in real life.
Yeah, time is a real issue, right? So back in I think maybe the 2013, 2014 time frame, we ran a national, basically a national tabletop exercise. And time was a part of that, and so NTP and time is still extremely vulnerable, and Josh, like you said, like. Very important for like, okay, what happened, right? We trust time. So, yeah.
And there's like one or two developers that manage the NTP code, right?
Yeah.
I think we talked about that before. It's interesting we're talking about it again in this context. Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: extended access management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password.
Well, hey, I want to talk about my story number 2. It's their title, not mine, but it's the Protester's Guide to Smartphone Security. And so, one of the things I've known about this site for many years, and a lot of times I get asked, "Hey, like how do you configure your phone for security?" And you really start talking about, well, it starts with OPSEC. You really have to worry about yourself, and how you're using it and those kind of things. But I wanted to throw this out there. This is a really good primer on how to like if you are concerned about something that you're doing, speaking of like murder, Josh, like if you're going to murder someone, how do you handle your smartphone or whatever? But this is a really, really good primer, and actually it goes in depth about a lot of OPSEC, like operational security, how you should handle your phone, what you should be prepared for, like if you're going to be addressed by law enforcement or maybe somebody who's an authority figure that that you're opposing or something like that. But one of the things that they did, they've recently updated it, just actually this week, to include some additional additions about burner phones, storage of data, public Wi-Fi, and just some of those kind of things. But uh, I, I do think that people like that. If you're listening to this podcast, this probably would be of interest to you. And just for the record, primarily it's around how you use it, right? It's not about installing antivirus and not installing TikTok and all of these things. It's truly about OPSEC on securing your device or how you use your device. So I just want to throw that out there.
It's a great article. Honestly, I think it's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have it. This is a common question students come to me with, and this is a better answer than what I've been giving them.
Yeah, so I do a lot of work. So with oppressed, people, and not necessarily in this country, but other countries, and so this has been a resource that we've used in the past, to help journalists and just people that are trying to get the message out or whatever. So
nice.
All right.
I wanted to talk about the Juniper backdoor, which, I mean, say Juniper backdoor, conceivably this could have been installed anywhere. It was touted in the press as the magic packet. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. And finally, when I got down to reading it, I was like, oh, so we're going old school, right? I mean, it basically, when the magic packet is a nice, marketing term, but it's very close to port knocking is one type of this type of backdoor, right? Port knocking is largely, when we're talking about port knocking, it's closed ports, right? And it's air quotes listening on those closed ports, right, in the TCP/IP stack. You've also got is it Mark Rash that wrote FWNOP?
FWKNOP, yeah. And
FWKNOP. Is the project, and that's the term they use is SPA, or single packet authentication.
Right.
Which it listens for that and then opens up ports and communications based on that. The attackers in this case chose to implement, and I didn't realize how far back this went, a 2000 project from the Fenelit group.
Wow.
CD00R.C, which uses a packet sniffer to observe certain TCP/IP options and header values to trigger a backdoor.
Wow.
So when I read the description, it was like, well, if it sees a packet with the TCP option set to this value and a header of this value, so it's using all the fields in the TCP/IP headers. If I see those special things, then I implement the backdoor. And I was like, oh, so many years ago, I could have written a snort rule, probably from memory, on how to detect this, right? Like back in the day when that was, what we were doing. Now it would take me a lot longer. Although with the advent of an LLM, probably not. I could probably have the LLM just generate it for me.
Yep.
Like, hey, just detect a packet with these parameters. Like, I'm like, this was like basic stuff. I mean, this is like early 2000s, 90s kind of stuff that we were doing with IDSs back in the day. So again, none of this is really new. I think what's new is the attackers going after the system, us not having visibility into these systems. And so attackers don't have to use necessarily clever new techniques. They can just do variations on older techniques to do this. And like, what happened to, we do still monitor the network, but like, we don't monitor it the same way I feel like we used to when we're heavy on intrusion detection systems. And then it was declared dead and in the whole thing. But like a good intrusion detection system it could easily detect this traffic and probably easily block it. Now you can probably have a device that blocks this traffic.
Well, I mean, what's distinctive about it? I mean, it could look just like on a normal traffic, like port knocking, right? How would you know?
Well, so this says, for example.
So I think once you know, though, right, that we need to have that detection capabilities that's very easy to update, snort rules, those kind of things to be able to.
Like this is a classic definition of a snort rule. At offset 0x02 from the start of TCP options shows the following 2-byte sequence of 1366.
Okay.
TCP options must be at least 4 bytes in size. The attacker IP address will be in the sequence number field of the TCP header, and the destination port's 443. I mean, that's basically like metadata for a snort rule, right?
Yeah. So that particular tool uses a predictable pattern, but there's no need for it to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly get fancy with it,
and also, just
there still need to be something different about the packet.
Well, I feel like I've asked this question before, but it still bothers me. If I have a Juniper router, why doesn't it just make sure that 100% of all the software on there is signed by Juniper and no alien stuff is allowed to run? It's not a general purpose computer. How are we allowing unauthorized code to run on our edge devices? It seems like maintaining integrity of the system would be achievable.
Because they need to have something on there that did the integrity of it.
That's what iPhones have.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything has to be signed by Apple from the store. Why doesn't Juniper just do the same thing? It doesn't seem impossible.
That's what Secure Boot is.
Well, that's
up to, not the file system, but up to the kernel modules or drivers, it validates all of those cryptographically. And again, when you implement a process like that, obviously there's bypasses. It's all about getting.
But you need Secure Boot and you need gatekeepers. So every process that launches later also has to prove its signature. Obviously, it's not working. All our routers and VPN concentrators are getting infected. But it seems like all we'd have to do is make them as secure as an iPhone, which is not outrageous to ask for. And if you do that, you could just charge an extra $50 for your routers and people would pay it. Somebody should do that.
Right. Yeah, but this one was in memory only, was the artifact on that.
I know, but that would also be blocked. You can't launch any process without it being an official process signed by the developer you trust.
Are you sure? Are you sure, Paul, that it was in memory?
Yeah, this article said it was in memory only.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, it wasn't June OS that, that was compromised, right? Somehow they had to get this code into, that into those devices, because it only looks like 36 organizations were impacted, and who knows how many devices. But, but what it sounds like to me is somebody found a vulnerability and were able to exploit it, and they're like, we want to build backdoors, and someone's like, hey, I remember from the 2000s, like magic packet, right? Like, and like they found the code, and there you go, right? Like,
yeah,
Sam, that needs to be a t-shirt. I want my routers to be as secure as my iPhone, right? Like,
no,
or like whatever. Like, I'm glad that this is recorded because that was a beautiful statement, right?
That's a sticker. I want my hardware to be as secure as my iPhone.
Right. I want the core. I want the core internet routers.
Yeah.
But I see what you're saying, Sam, because in the context of if you were to make a driver for Windows or you to make an app for the App Store,
Yeah.
you have to go through a signing process, and they have to sign third-party code. In the
and
context of a manufacturer, Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto, Fortinet, whoever it is, right? They control the entire ecosystem. There's probably not a whole lot of third-party code they need to accommodate on those systems, and so they could implement a system that
and the iPhone has an app store and a million apps. You're running all this arbitrary code, but you're not doing that on a router. It should really only be running like 10 trusted processes and nothing else.
It's true.
The problem is it's also a monoculture. So if, with an iPhone, I have to get you to download my nasty malware app. Come on, big boy, come download my app.
Yeah.
On a router, if I can get into one of those 10 trusted processes on, I don't know, an upgrade server that somebody left a password to somewhere, I own all of them.
Well, that's true. Same thing's true of iPhones too. I mean, we've always been expecting, but Apple's been secure enough. It hasn't happened, but Apple's also a monoculture. So for like decades, I've been hearing there'll be a worm wiping out all the iPhones, but it hasn't happened.
Apple also spends the money to do this.
Yeah.
That's the kicker. You can make your routers, and I don't know why, it's because I heard routers recently. You can make your router as secure as your iPhone. You just have to be willing to spend the money to do so.
Well, Apple used to make routers. Maybe they should make them again.
Apple used to make servers too.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, it would raise the bar, right? Because in the protection mechanism similar to that, Sam, the attacks basically get in before or hook the function that's checking for integrity, right? We saw that actually with Sophos, right? It was hooking those functions. So
yeah, well, I'd like to hear how that.
But make attackers do that. I'm all about making it harder for attackers, right? I agree.
Yeah. Blue team, yeah. I think it's. Wasn't there? Do you remember So Hopelessly Broken?
Yeah.
The Soho project for Soho routers.
Yes.
All the routers were so vulnerable and for very simple problems.
It was just terrifying how bad they were.
Well, and they're kind of big. They're also selling for like $20-$30, which is the fundamental problem, right? Like all of IoT, you've gone to the bottom.
You must be willing to spend the money for things to happen.
But I think enterprises would be willing to pay a lot for their edge devices to make them more secure.
For sure.
Juniper's not a home router.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Juniper's not a home router, but I know people that use them at home. Okay,
and they expect them to be more secure, I imagine. I would.
They do, so then why isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's the rub right there we're seeing now, right? Why are attackers going after them? Why aren't they more secure? Why don't we have better visibility?
Yeah.
It comes back to, if I get Windows and I put it in my environment, there's a whole bunch of stuff I do to Windows to harden it. I put extra software on it, like EDR, to make it more secure. But if I go get a firewall or VPN appliance, I don't have that luxury. I don't think it's like we wouldn't want visibility and protection on those. It's that we can't do it right now because the platforms aren't open enough for us to do it.
Well, you can use open stuff like Viata and stuff. You could go that way.
True.
But then that's not practical for most people because you want something commercial supported by
What do they call it now? The project is something different. I was listening to that, a Linux project. What was the Linux router? Was Quagga?
Yeah,
but they renamed it.
But
they renamed it multiple, and the project changed hands. They were talking about it on
Viata
a podcast.
Was it Viata?
That's the problem.
That's
the problem with things that don't make money. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a problem.
Well,
Josh, were you saying something, Josh? You're on mute.
Yeah. Well, while we're on this,
I think it was Viata OS.
Yeah, Viata. Yeah, but while we're on this, I would like to understand something else. On my story number 7, a USB hard drive, USB stick that has antivirus on it. How can this even be possible? Does it have a processor and RAM too?
Yeah, I was curious. I was hoping you could shed some light on this because I thought it was
details
interesting.
here, and it's not available in America, so nobody has tested it, but it claims that it has antivirus running on the thumb drive and detects viruses and blocks them with both signature and heuristic-based detection. So it apparently has to have a whole computer on the thumb drive, I guess. I'm not understanding it.
It says designed to provide physical security against malware and virus infections, comes with built-in endpoint protection, the Deepseek security endpoint, the security service that continuously monitors files saved or updated. I mean, it's just like a AV that runs off a thumb drive.
Yeah, and it's got so how would it get the updates of the signatures, and how can it have enough processor and RAM? Where's it getting the power? I mean, this seems impossible to me. I hope they start selling it over here and somebody can test it and tell us how it works. But it sounds like just magic.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So so just to be clear, I have several devices there in my bag I'd show you right now that look like thumb drives, but operate as CPUs, right? Paul, you've probably got one within reach, right? So there are a lot of, like, I think the one that I'm using right now is called like the Pico USB.
Yeah. LilyGo makes one.
Yeah, and
with a screen on it, and there's a firmware for it that I started messing with.
And so, like, it fully powered off of off of the USB. It takes it takes about a second for it to boot and then be able to act as a computer. And so what's neat about it is the USB interface itself can register. The way that the device itself can register to the USB can be many different things, right? So we're very accustomed to a USB drive being mass storage, right? Where we expect it to be somewhere that we store files, but that's not everything that it can be. Obviously, we've seen hit attacks, with things like the OMG cables, those kind of USB rubber ducky, those kind of things where they register as a keyboard or a mouse or whatever, and being able to inject items into into the computer. There's some lesser known things that a USB can be is USB gadgets. So think about like an Ethernet adapter or things like that. So, but just looking, I agree, Sam. I'd like to look at this, but I would venture to guess that what this is it's probably what a so I looked up Deepseek security endpoint, and it says a service that protects storage devices like USB drives and NAS from cyber threats. It works on Windows and Linux operating systems. So imagine that USB drive has an exe that you execute. It loads a service on the Windows box that prevents, you know what I mean? Right. Yeah. I don't imagine.
That's just opening a whole can of worms for more trouble. If that's what it's doing.
Well, remember, like, back in the day, like, I don't remember what the USB drives were that came out, but
I remember the days of XP. They'd open up another start button and have apps on the USB.
That's
right.
They
canceled it all because that was so dangerous.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It was the USB Army knife.
Yes.
You install on the LilyGo
USB Switchblade.
LilyGo T dongle S3. I have two of those, and it allows you to do USB hit attacks that allow over Wi-Fi keystroke injection, mass storage emulation, network device impersonation, USB Ethernet, and capturing the screen by deploying a VNC server.
Yeah,
and
Microsoft
you control that from like a web browser. Usually they do it on a phone. They have the web browser on the phone, and you put this device. It also has an SD card reader built into it that sits right above the USB plug on it. They're inexpensive. I picked up a couple of them.
This is why Microsoft took Auto Run out of Windows XP and Service Pack 1 just to stop this.
But that's what the what's the Hack 5 device that does that? It's the
Bash Bunny.
Bash Bunny. Yeah.
Bash Bunny does the emulates a network device rather than a USB.
Well, it can do all of them. It can do all of them. Yeah.
Right.
But it also looks very suspicious too. So it looks, if you were to see it like plugged into your computer, you would be like, this is bad day. Like, this is not good. Right. It's maybe an inch thick. You know what I mean? Like it's a big boy. So.
Yeah.
Where are we going from there?
I really enjoyed reading Bill Bill's actually story number 8, custom smartwatch for type 1 diabetics.
Yeah.
That was a really cool story, Bill. I got to tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so what this story is, and sorry, Josh, I don't mean to cut you off, but
No, go.
so this was a dad who had a son that had type 1 diabetes, and he wanted to be able to make sure that his son was able to manage that, right, and to monitor it, and decided that, I want to build my own monitoring, like give him a smartwatch that was purpose built purpose built, that could provide that information back. And what I loved about this, this article was, he addresses like, man, why didn't you just buy an Apple Watch, right?
Right.
And I mean,
or an M5 Stick C.
Well, and so he
comes with a watch band as well. Looks like he looked into that, but the battery life does suck on those things,
right? And so what he ended up doing, and what caught my attention on this one, obviously, anytime somebody's building a smartwatch, and I'll go read it. But what I really liked about this is, while he was an engineer, he had never done any kind of like circuit board design, like and so he had to make his own custom PCB and all of these things. And he walks that, this is a very, very, it's not necessarily a long article. I mean, it's many pages long, but it's not like,
it's not a hard read.
It's not a hard read, right? But kind of goes through his development. He does end up using, ESP based modules.
Yeah. The S3 has a pretty good processor on it. It's an upgraded processor in the S3.
Yeah. But it was really more around the engineering process of how he developed this. This is the kind of thing that just, I love. This is
hacking at its finest.
Hacking at its finest. He had a very clear goal in mind. He knew that he could learn how to do it, and he did. Just a great article.
Yeah, that's pretty. I mean, you're doing a lot from scratch in this one. From 3D printing, like, designing and the whole thing from scratch.
And look at it towards
the end. It kind of looks like a bigger Apple Watch.
It looks great. It looks fantastic.
It does.
A good looking device. It's amazing how he cobbled it together and made such a professional looking device, and it works. He's keeping track of his kids' glucose and sugar. He's managing it better, and he's peace of mind. And his kid has a watch, which isn't an Apple Watch, which is, as he put it, designed to addict you to the Apple Watch.
Yeah, I love it. It's so good.
And he ran into the secure boot problem.
Oh yeah,
because Arduino IDE, you can't do the security mechanisms like flash encryption in the Arduino IDE. You got to use the ESP IDF to do that. Because I think I talked about it last week. You got to modify the bootloader to do some of those encryption, like secure boot and flash encryption on it. Good for you, man. That's awesome.
I know. That is so cool. Good for him.
That is pretty neat. Let's be honest. So I enjoyed that story immensely, and I already said it to my wife. My wife has had long conversations with people about glucose monitoring, because a part of it is these GLP-1 serums that are out. And the fact is that sugar for us it's friggin' poison. And so she was actually, my wife got gestational diabetes when she had her kids. And it was ugly. So she got really up on this. My wife does research, like she dives down rabbit holes with glee.
Should go buy one of that dude's watches. Just yeah.
I want to go back to when we were talking about routers, because I have an interesting story. My story number 17. It's interesting that how the compute power has changed and how much legacy gear we have out there, right? I think it was one of the things we hadn't talked about in that context is we can fix some things moving forward, and that's much easier than trying to address the legacy problems. And a research group found that when they looked at VxWorks was using in certain versions, depending on which version, weak password hashing algorithms. And so the password hashing algorithms with the fewer passes, right? So they're hashing it, 1,000 times versus 5,000 times versus 100,000 times, basically just iterating over the hashing algorithm. So it's obviously computationally expensive the more passes that you have. But 15 years ago, let's say, which I believe is traced back in this article, I talked about something in 2010. System resources were a lot more scarce 15 years ago. So if you wanted to be your code to be leaner, you would implement a weaker password hashing algorithm. But today we've got not only better hashing algorithms that are resistant to GPU cracking, but much faster hardware. So what the research found was they were still using these older password hashing algorithms, and if you're able to recover the hashes, GPUs today on a 4090 can crack that stuff pretty fast.
Well, I just want to point out that even the weakest one that he mocks is stronger than what Windows uses today.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Windows uses one round of MD4 because they developed it in 1993 before MD5 was even created. It is a sin and a shame. I mean, Linux figured out that they had to do 5,000 rounds of hashing in 1975, and Microsoft hasn't got the memo yet.
And today it's the hashing. I prompted an LLM because I was like, I don't even know what hashing algorithms are used today. I don't even know if I can. Yeah, how do modern
PBKGF2 and bcrypt and scrypt?
Yeah,
Argon 2ID, scrypt, bcrypt.
Yep, those are, and most of them are just using many rounds of the old hashing algorithms, but Argon is a new hashing algorithm. This is all in the book, Serious Cryptography, which is great.
That's ridiculous.
Nice. That's awesome.
Can we, I know we're going to shift it up a little bit. Can we talk about your story number one?
Who's that?
The Bamboo Labs.
Yeah. So we talked about Bamboo Labs last week, but this week now at SuperCon, which is Hackaday's conference, security researcher basically figured out how to get custom firmware on the X1 Carbon, and presented at it on at the conference. So it's super interesting, right? Because you got a device like a 3D printer, runs firmware. Obviously, the hacker in us is like, well, how do we get custom firmware on it? And the back and forth between Bamboo Labs, like, has everyone kind of like a little skeptical? Because Bamboo was like, oh yeah, that's fine. Like, you can do that. You can, like, okay, go run your own code. But we're kind of like half expecting that Bamboo might back off on that at some point. That's just short-lived.
Why? What makes you think that? Or the internet think that?
They say vendors got to be vendors. And he predicts the cat and mouse game will continue. Yeah, and because of the story that we covered last week, Bill, where they basically, I don't know if you were here last week or not, but you weren't. So Bamboo is adding mandatory authorization. So what that means is you can't use a custom slicer.
Oh.
So like the Bamboo slicer, what is Bamboo slicer called? What is it called? Bamboo Studio, right? All good because it comes from Bamboo, right? Now it's the slicer I use because I just started with 3D printing not that long ago. I'm like, that's fine. But apparently a lot of people like to use other slicer software. But to interface with certain functions that you would need to a slicer software in the Bamboo's going to lock that down so you can't access those functions from third-party slicers. And so that was if you're going to run custom firmware on it, that's a whole different level. And I think we've always seen this back and forth with Bamboo in their firmware and ecosystem where they want to be more like Apple, but the community wants them to be more like Linux.
Right.
And we've got this, back and forth going on.
Well, so I know that we're, kind of running out of time here, but my hacker chat groups this week, we're talking about two stories, Deepseek, which we've already covered, and your story number 4, the unique zero-click de-anonymization attack targeting Signal, Discord, and everything else.
From a 15-year-old high school junior in his free time.
from a 15-year-old high school junior.
But it only gets your location within 250 miles. So why do we even care?
Because he's 15, Sam, and it's awesome.
Right.
Like that's why.
But the actual vulnerability is nothing.
Well,
I could get much more accurate location tracking from your IP address.
That's not actually true, Sam. It's not nothing. If I am a
How are you going to get my
journalist,
IP address from a Signal chat?
Yeah, if I'm a New York journalist and you can de-anonymize a Signal chat of mine and find out I'm in Nevada, there's something going on.
You can go by state or country, right? With 250 miles.
It does actually matter.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I do agree.
it's not as bad as he's right there.
Yeah.
But it's
so the long story short was what he understood was that by leveraging Cloudflare CDN, right, and you can determine because Cloudflare will try to find the nearest provider to that person to give them that image, that he could start to geolocate individuals by sending an image via Signal, Discord, etc. So you can't poo-poo on this there, Sam. Like, I love it. I just, first of all, his introductory paragraph, I was just like, man, get this. We're gonna see more. We're gonna see more from Daniel. This is somebody who understands to explore his world, right? And he understands technology in a way that other 15-year-olds do not, right? And
he's gonna go somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I think that will conclude the show for this evening. Thanks to everyone participating this evening. Thanks to everyone listening and watching. We'll see you next time. Over and out.